Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFI's Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses some potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rogers with VFI's Client Risk Solutions, and today we're discussing chaplaincy in the fire service. And we want to talk about some things your organization should consider in this avenue. I want to welcome Jimmy Fannin to the program. Jimmy is the Chief Chaplain for Chaplains Corp of Lancaster County, and Jimmy services the Lancaster County area in Pennsylvania. He's also been an emergency services chaplain for 11 years. Jimmy, I want to thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
That's wonderful to hear. So to get started, why should an organization consider a chaplaincy program?
I think chaplaincy programs are good for either the volunteers or the staff of any organization, especially in emergency services. We oftentimes have employees and or volunteer staff that deal with critical incidents. And the idea of a chaplaincy program is to help people manage that incident stress.
So is this a program that we should just focus on the first responders that go out to a scene, or should we integrate our public citizens into this?
In our experience, our mission is to serve the first responder. However, we see a way of doing that is by serving the victims that they're serving. In other words, to help and take some of that off of the incident commanders so that we can serve first responders through helping victims move to the next steps, whether that's housing or things like that.
So if a department, they don't have something in place, or they're looking to start a program, enhance their program, what are some things that they should consider when they look to develop a program?
I think staffing. Do you have the right fit for someone to do that? It certainly can be emotionally traumatic for folks who aren't prepared or aren't trained. First responders deal with emotional trauma on a regular basis to begin with. Then we're going to insert someone or someones who are going to help them manage that incident stress. The right fit, the right people is so very important.
Is there, you come from an organization that focuses on this. Is it often a good idea to maybe look externally before looking at internally to get some ideas?
I think relationship building is the top priority for a chaplain. So it's best in our experience to look for someone internally, having someone that we've worked with or served with over some years that we trust and can be vulnerable with, especially in times of great need. That's super important. However, if we don't have those people who have the skills or the desire to do it, then I think looking externally is great to do whatever will benefit your employees or your staff as best as you can.
So using folks internally is the first step because of that trust factor that you mentioned.
Because the relationships are already built, yeah.
And we're vulnerable with each other
Absolutely.
each day. So does a religious background matter when it comes to creating this program with an ESO?
I think depending on the ESO, depending on the organization. So for us as an organization, we are biblically grounded. That's where we come from. We're a Christian organization. That doesn't dictate who we will or won't serve. I think the organization should evaluate what's best for the organization. From my perspective, faith background is best. We live in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, deeply enriched in faith background. And so it's helpful for us. That doesn't mean it's helpful for everyone.
Are there things that we should consider? Because not everyone is a Christian base.
Sure.
In their faith. Are there things that we should consider in our chaplaincy program if we're going to potentially have people of other faiths in our department?
Absolutely. I think for us, what we try to do is refer people to those people in their line of faith if they have that, whether it's a differing faith from Christianity, but if they've got pastors or rabbis or things that they are connected to, we want to connect those folks to their spiritual guidance, if you will, so that they're avoiding PTSD, able to manage that incident stress. That's the point of chaplaincy, right? Is we want employers to have good employees who want to keep doing the job. And if it's volunteer staff, the same.
First responders, they have a reputation as a very hardened group. They're not always eager to reach out for help. So in your experience, is there a desire for first responders to ask chaplains for help, or do you almost kind of have to force the issue?
Yeah, well, we don't force any issues. That's just not what chaplaincy is. I hear what you're saying. Yeah, sure. No, not at all. But it is. There's certainly 20 years ago that, suck it up and deal with that incident was pretty popular. I'm 47, been in the service 30 years. And so I understand, I have had experience with just that. That obstacle seems much easier to climb in 2022. emotional trauma has become, through the military really, has become a highlight of avoiding PTSD. And so I don't see that hurdle as being as high to jump any longer. But sure, I think in any organization or at any job, we've always done it this way can be a real poison. Although those traditions, those things have worked and will continue to work, I think sometimes we need to look maybe a little broader to what can we do now, today, to help with the different types of circumstances, incidents that first responders deal with.
Well, thankfully, nowadays it's not seen as a crutch to ask for help when you have some...
Much different.
Yeah, it's a much different scenario, and so there's far more avenues to ask for help, so it's not considered a negative as it had in the past. So do you find that chaplains play a critical role in the critical incident stress management teams of an organization?
I do. I've had experience in that specifically firsthand. I learned in a class years ago, the professor who said, incident stress is like filling up a cup of water. And you continue every incident, every critical incident, you put a drop of water in that cup. And if you don't have a way to empty it, at some point it's going to be full and it's going to overflow, and now you've got a mess. Managing incident stress is hoping to manage the stress through, let's use a valve like on the bottom of the cup. You open it every now and again, let some of that water out, that incident stress water out, so that you don't ever get the mess we would consider PTSD. Now, that's not mine. I learned that in a class, but that analogy of the cup that overflows and now we've got a mess to clean up is used in the sense that if we have a valve, whether it's chaplaincy or other types of incident stress management, that we can open that valve, let some of the stress out before we have a mess.
This is something that we kind of hit on a little bit earlier, but I want to circle back to it. When an organization is, looking for the, quote unquote, perfect chaplain for their needs, should you look for someone that has a background in emergency services, or is there something somewhere else we should look?
Yeah, I think we're all imperfect, and so finding the perfect chaplain is impossible. To be honest, we're all human beings, and so we all make mistakes. I think, in my experience, those who have a relationship with emergency services and whatever. It could be distant. It could be, my dad or my uncle or my brother is, but I'm not. Things like that are more helpful. They might understand a little more the stress that comes with these critical incidents. However, like I said, we're a Christian organization. I'm a faith-based guy. And so I think God gives us what we need to fulfill the purpose he's called us to. And in that, I also think that some people who have no experience with emergency services make great chaplains from that perspective. They're working hard to learn what's best. How do we treat and help folks that are in these high stress circumstances, keep it under wraps, if you will, and control it. So I do think there's no perfect chaplain, but I think in my experience anyway, those who have some experience, whether it's background, firsthand or other, with emergency services really do make great chaplains.
And just an eagerness to help people in need, which is
a want to serve
hallmark. People
is so super important. Like that's our organization is based on service. Like our heart is to serve people, especially first responders.
So Brian DeQuinn's an associate of mine, and he's joining us, and he had a quick question to chime in. Brian?
So Jimmy, when we start talking about the interaction of the chaplain in the fire department or EMS organization, law enforcement, whatever entity it is, do you feel it's important to get the chaplains involved and do ride-along time, do street time, and just understand a little bit more about what they're doing? And should the ESO be open to that?
I think that is a great way not only to help chaplains see what the job takes, but also build a relationship with that person or persons they're riding with. Riding, in 2022, it's rare that police officers are riding with partners. It just isn't that way. It's different in EMS. It's even different in the fire service. So having a chaplain who can physically be in a car or in an ambulance with EMS providers or on a fire truck or at fire scenes with firefighters just helps build a relationship. I think it's very important. I understand that some insurance policies have a hard time putting someone who isn't an employee in a car with a police officer or an EMS provider or a fire department, which I understand that. But if there are other ways to help them build relationships, whether it's through department meetings, other ways that they can just be face-to-face, hand-in-hand, shoulder-to-shoulder with the first responders, it absolutely builds relationship. If insurance policies allow, ride-alongs are, I'd say, like they say, where the magic happens. It's where the real ability to build a relationship and trust with a first responder comes in. If you're sitting in a car or an apparatus with them for 3 or 4 hours, or even a full 8 or 12-hour shift. Absolutely. I think it's critical to building relationships, to do ride-alongs or something of that nature. Yeah.
And you don't want the only time that you interact with them when things have hit the fan. You want to build that relationship beforehand. So whenever you have to have that conversation with them, it's someone that they know and trust.
I think all of us as humans, when tensions are high, we can kind of put our hands up and not necessarily want to be fully open for whatever that fear or anxiety might be. But if I've had a relationship with someone who I've had a relationship with outside of high times of stress, then sure, wouldn't I just humanly be willing, more open to have real conversation, authentic conversation with them when I'm really hurting?
So we talked about some of the, the historic hurdles when it came to discussing mental health. What do you think the most recent or the most current hardest hurdle is to get over whenever we're creating a chaplaincy program?
In Lancaster County, I think anything new, it's the county is searching. Lancaster County, Pennsylvania is steeped in tradition and conservative tradition. I don't necessarily mean that politically, but things have worked for many, many years. And so I think having something introduced new without having much knowledge about or any experience with it is hard for anyone. I think in my experience, a big hurdle for chaplaincy is feeling like it's going to be religious. And that very well may be the case. But in my experience, the majority of time that I am with officers, EMS providers, firefighters, or victims, we're not talking about faith. We're talking about helping people get back to normal, just bringing some hope to their day, whether it's a house fire, someone's lost a loved one, or a police incident that's dramatic. I think a hurdle can be that does it have to be religious? It doesn't. It doesn't.
So how can we encourage our members to buy into the idea of a chaplain within the ESO to support these efforts?
Attitude reflects leadership. If leadership, whether it's command staff of fire, EMS, or police departments, if they buy in, and I mean authentic buy-in, if they can authentically see there's a need and want to actively meet that need, then I think the other employees or staff of those agencies will see it as important. It's most difficult to create something like this if the leadership of that organization or department doesn't see there's a need for it. It's a big hurdle. It doesn't mean it's unclimbable or unattainable, but those hurdles come when the obstacles are broken down, when leadership can buy in first and see that there's a need, whether it's for my employees or my volunteer staff or things like that helps. Attitude reflects leadership. I'm a big proponent of that statement.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because we say that, the leadership drives the culture of the organization,
Sure.
Not only from the program you just described, but from driver training, from making sure that our drivers are, when they're driving, that they're driving properly, to, all the policies and procedures we have. Without a positive culture, that those things can slip by the wayside. So that just shows that it's across the board that culture is a huge thing in the fire service.
Good leaders have followers, not just in emergency services, in business and other organizations. And I think that when those followers have a need and a leader sees a need and buys into that idea that will help meet that need, they'll follow that leader right to that fix, if you will.
Well, I'm going to round out the question with one last question we have here. This is obviously a very important subject to you, so I want to end it with this. Why do you feel that a chaplaincy is very important to an emergency services organization?
Especially I think chaplaincy is important in any organization, especially in emergency services. First responders see everyone's life, or most of the time, when they're at their worst. Like I said earlier, whether it's a lost loved one, some type of police incident, or their house is burning down. First responders are watching these folks, humans, right? First responders are humans. They have a heart for service to begin with, whether they're volunteers or paid. Their heart, their passion, what they're doing with their life is serving others. They don't always get to see the end product. And so what they see is an EMS crew will load a patient then at the hospital and drive away, not knowing fully what the outcome is. Firefighters will leave a scene, see families crying over a burned house, or police officers will leave a scene, seeing the emotional trauma on victims. Who do they have to help them walk through that? That's why I think chaplaincy is so very important, so that first responders have an outlet, if you will, to help manage that stress from that emotional trouble they see every day of their lives. We run out of those situations as regular civilians. They run in to serve us. That's why I think it's so very important.
Brian, do you have one follow-up?
I do. So, Jimmy, just to kind of end this out, when we talk about just all of those things and when we get the chaplains involved, and we talked about critical incident stress management, is there really a time window that we should get the chaplain involved? Is that something that, as soon as we get back from that incident, we start to talk about it, or do we let it digest for a day or two? In your experience, is there any kind of right or wrong answer to that?
Sure. Well, there's a couple different ways that the Critical Incident Stress Foundation applies, just what you're talking about, debriefing or diffusing. I think when an ESO wants to establish a program like this, building relationships is so very important. So it's almost in the moment. If you have peer support, it's over the last decade or two, that's really what the studies show, that peer support is really super at helping manage incident stress. If that peer support has a chaplain integrated, a firefighter, a police officer, an EMS provider who are trained in that sort, then the diffusing process of that, the immediate after incident debriefing, we'd call it a diffusing in the business, but the diffusing would happen in the moment with a peer. Then 24 to 72 hours, the studies show this should have some type of debriefing for critical incidents. So having relationships built where that can happen almost immediately after the incident is best. ICISF would say, 24 to 72 hours for our formal debriefing. I hope I answered your question the way you were thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives the organizations the opportunity to start diving into this a little bit more and start thinking about when do they need to plan for these things post-incident? Is it getting back to the station and starting those discussions, or, do I need to schedule these guys to come back in 2 days from now to regroup and reconvene and let's kind of hot wash this and make sure that everybody's going back a little bit better than what they came with.
Yeah, we do it for operational debriefings, right? We want to hot wash how the incident went from a tactical perspective. It's just really new over the last 5 to 10 years that we're doing that from the emotional perspective. From the fire service end, thinking of automatic fire alarms or class 2 accidents with property damage and no real human injury. Those things we kind of see as regular bread and butter every day. We see them all the time. It's when we have critical incidents. Oftentimes it involves children, or oftentimes it involves a gruesome kind of scene. Those are the times to elevate our response as leaders or as chaplains to then hopefully help first responders process what they've seen, what they've been through, and how can we help them manage that stress so that they avoid PTSD.
Well, Jimmy, I want to thank you for joining us today. That was a lot of great information, and I think our listeners can really benefit from it.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program today and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guest, Jimmy Fannin, once again for his time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing VFISriskcontrol@VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.